I'm using such informal welcome because I do believe that we have succeeded in one thing: to build our institution, which is named, and I'm sure that you know the name of CEVRO Institute, as a place where the people who are not thinking only about themselves, and the people who are taking care about the world around them, that we succeed in building this institution as a place where such kind of people who are even sharing the same values or the very common values are coming again and again to discuss, to think about the things which are surrounding us, to share their views, their opinions on the challenges we are faced. And that's why I'm glad, and that's why I use such informal welcome and not welcoming everybody here and mentioning their positions and their former or present functions. I hope that you're going and we are going to enjoy this afternoon. This afternoon is again one step in our cooperation with our friends in Herzliya, and now I have to mention one name. The name is Tomáš Pojar, thanks to him, and the second name is Sasha Vondra, and the third name is, I don't know which one, thanks to whom we signed the memorandum, which is fulfilled now, and many of you were taking part in another conference we had with our friends from IDC in Herzliya, and I'm sure that this is not the last one. And I'm sure that my opening welcome I'm going to repeat next time and again and again and again. I wish to all of you to have a good time today. My warm welcome to our guests, and I do believe that after this conference you will leave our institution as our friends, as the people who will help us to strengthen the position of our college, which name is CEVRO Institute. Welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much for coming. I do thank Eli and Jonathan for coming from Israel. Of course, Mr. Kovanda, General Kovanda coming from Prostějov. We have had a full day of briefings and meetings inside Prague on the topic which we will discuss here. The topic is current trends and future of global jihad, but of course we are going to be focusing on the area which is in between of the Mediterranean Sea and the Persian Gulf, so the whole territory where the borders have ceased to exist and the new borders and frontiers have been shifting and are being drawn these days or these years, as the space of Lebanon, Syria and Iraq, where we are not directly as Czechs involved, but indirectly we are, and we will perhaps be even more in the future, no matter if we wish it or not. I will not prolong the introduction. First I will ask Eli Karmon to speak, to present from the podium, then the others, and then I hope there will be a time for responses and questions and answers. Eli is a senior research scholar in the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism with a long history and broad variety of topics. Last but not least, he's my teacher. So I do welcome him here, and without further ado, please, Eli, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Tomáš, for inviting me to Prague. It's not my first visit to Prague, but I always enjoy your wonderful city, and this time also the presence, the public here at the CEVRO Institute. Several years ago, I was invited to the London conference about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we are 6 panelists, and we received 5 minutes, everyone, to give a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So you understand what was my response. But we have now 20 minutes, every one of us, to explain a very complex issue, because although the main subject is the ISIL, or the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, or the Al-Sham in Arabic, actually this is a much broader problem and issue. So I'll try in those 20 minutes to explain why and how the ISIS became such a challenge, not only to Syria, not only to Iraq, but actually for the world. So I'll give some broader ideas about. We have here how this conflict began. You have a coalition, what we call triple coalition. You have Iran, Ahmadinejad. You have Syria, the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, and Hezbollah, Nasrallah. It's a coalition which began to be active since 1982. And when the uprising in Syria began in March 2011, actually the regime received a huge support, first of all, from the Iranian regime, because they wanted their allies to survive. It is very important strategically for them that the Bashar regime survived. And Hezbollah, at the moment the regime began to be weak, was introduced as a proxy, as a support for the army, which was in a way crumbling. So these were the first, if you want, criminals, because before the massacres of ISIL in 2013, in 2011 this regime killed hundreds of thousands of people, 200,000 people until today. They began by kidnapping and also torturing and killing children of 10, 12 years, which were kidnapped from mosques and then killed outside the city. And so the Pacific uprising became a violent one. And we'll see what are the forces that the regime on the one hand and the opposition or the rebels on the second hand were using. Sorry. Now, if you look to the two, this is the symbol of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards of Iran, and this is the symbol or the flag of the Hezbollah. What are the strategic goals of these two players? You see that here is the globe. It's not the Middle East, it's not the Gulf. Actually, the two of them want to conquer and to become the hegemon in the globe. And the Syrian regime was the one which supported them, at least in the Middle East. Now, as I said, Hezbollah was very important at the second stage of the fight, when the regime became, or the military force of the regime to crumble, and the Hezbollah, which was seen until then as a hero of the Arab world, all of a sudden is seen like this. You see a wounded wing of the Arab nation, not the hero of the past. And the second group of supporters of the regime were all these organizations, Shiite organizations from Iraq. From Iraq, they were trained, financed by the Iranians, and sent, first of all, to Damascus. You see, they said they are sent to defend the holy place, the Zainab tomb, which is a holy place for all the Shiites. Actually, they began to be active not only in this place, but actually in all of the Damascus and Aleppo region. So you understand that the Iranians, together with the regime of Bashar al-Assad and Hezbollah, were active in the destruction of all the infrastructure by bombing and by attacking the Sunni opposition, if you want. By the way, a lot of Afghanis, Yemenis of Shiite origin were also fighting alongside the Iranians. Here you have the Druze, which are a small community which was more or less neutral. You have the Kurds, which at the beginning were quite neutral. These are the organization, by the way, which are fighting in Kobane. Okay, the importance of this Kurdish community is that for the first time they succeeded in having autonomy. In northern, I'll show you later the maps, kind of cantons, autonomous region for the Kurds, the first time in their history that they could be independent. These are Christians which fought with the Kurds, by the way, in order against the Shia on the one side, against the regime, but also against the Sunni, ISIS, and other jihadists. And now those which are the opposition, how the ISIS, the Sunni opposition, became the main player in the opposition. This was the first force, the Free Syrian Army, which at the beginning had some 80,000 fighters, many of them deserters from the Syrian army. But little by little, this became a disordered army, corrupted army, and they didn't fulfill the expectations of the opposition and also of their supporters from outside Syria. Look how they presented themselves. You see, like a very organized army with fronts, with the commanders. Actually, it was an empty shell. Little by little, it became an empty shell. So, for the first time, we see an Islamist alliance, a coalition, only in the middle of 2012. After 1 year and a half of fighting, the Islamists become more and more involved and successful. And this first coalition is called Syrian Islamic Front. It has, you see, 4 plus 3. Actually, there are dozens of organizations because under them, you have dozens of groups, small groups in every neighborhood. In every small village, you have a warlord, a charismatic leader, who decides to be part of this one, or this one, or this one. And nobody is compelling them. It's a free, voluntarily they decide where to begin to fight. And so the Free Syrian Army, little by little, loses its importance, and only the political activity outside Syria is supported by the West. But these are not supported by the West, because for the first time we see that the West is outsourcing, especially the United States and Europe, outsourcing its support to 3 more regional powers. One is Turkey, the second is Saudi Arabia, the third is Qatar. These 3 countries, Sunni countries, have very important vested and contradictory interests. So we see that the Turks, the Qataris, and the Saudis begin to support not the Free Syrian Army, but this kind of coalition and other groups, including the jihadists. Now, in September 2013, 2 weeks after the Syrian regime uses, if you remember, the chemical attack in Damascus, killing 1,400 people. And the American administration decides not to attack Syria, but makes a deal with the Russians to dismantle the chemical facilities of the Syrian regime. There is a new coalition called the Islamic Alliance. You see 11 organizations, and for the first time you have Al-Qaeda or jihadist organization affiliated. One is called Jabhat al-Nusra, and the second is called ISIS. Okay? So for the first time we see that they are part of the big coalition. But 2 months later, you see another coalition. In November 2013, all of a sudden you have an Islamic Front. What happened? Here is very important to understand the Saudi role. The Saudi regime understood that the jihadists of ISIS and of the Jabhat al-Nusra represent a threat to their own regime. So they decided to form another coalition and to give them the financial and training necessary for the fight, and trying to stop the support to the ISIS. You here see that this also is a kind of another coalition, because this group or this coalition began to lose ground in the fight against ISIS. At the end of 2013, for the first time, we see that the ISIS begins to become the main fighter force by assassinating the leaders of this organization. Simply assassinating many of the leaders and of the Free Syrian Army. They have a lot of volunteers from abroad, thousands of volunteers from abroad, and they begin to occupy territory in Syria. They take control of a very important region called Deir ez-Zor, where there is oil fields, one of the richest oil fields in Syria. So they are successful. They attack the more moderate opposition, and they have resources. They have a lot of money from the oil fields. They have a lot of money from donors, especially Qatar, in the Gulf, and they have a strategy of terror. We saw all on the, I hope, on the television, on the internet, how this cruelty is advancing their strategic goal. The Iraqi army and other groups become afraid of these fighters and simply retreat or run away. So this is the last coalition, because every one of the others crumbled, that is still trying to fight the ISIS in the north. And here we see for the first time the Saudi regime. As you see, this is a caricature in the Saudi main newspaper saying that we must fight extremism, terrorism, okay? For the first time, this country decides on laws that prohibits to fight abroad, prohibits financing of terrorist organizations, and is arresting religious leaders which support ISIS. This is a huge change because they are one of the main financiers, and also because they are pressing Qatar, the small country, very rich country, which are supporting these groups. And we see the last 2 months that Qatari also become more moderate. So Jabhat al-Nusra is one of the jihadist or Al-Qaeda groups. Actually, this is the real Al-Qaeda faction or associate in Syria. They are fighting since 2012, more or less, quite successfully. They are considered by the opposition to be legitimate Syrian fighters because they concentrate, you see, they concentrate to focus on the Syrian theater, not attacking the West, not attacking other countries. And the second group is the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Sham, which makes a move trying to put the Jabhat al-Nusra inside the organization without success. There is a split. And this group, which actually presents itself like a kind of Al-Qaeda, it is not Al-Qaeda. It is a jihadist organization which has roots in the Iraqi territory, not in Syria, but has succeeded, as I said, to occupy part of the Syrian territory, has rich resources, has many fighters, and has a motivation to advance its victories in the territory of Syria. And more organizations around the Arab and Muslim world, from Indonesia to Philippines and from Northern Africa to Pakistan, begin to present themselves or to pay allegiance to the new organization, which meanwhile has become its thrust inside Iraq. Because in June 2014, several months ago, the ISIS, which was active only in Syria, it seemed that they don't exist in Iraq, all of a sudden appear in Iraq by conquering one of the second biggest city, Mosul. And this is a shock, a strategic surprise to everybody, to the Iraqi government, to the West, and I will say for most of the players. How did they arrive at this situation? The problem is, as I said, that this is an Iraqi group that for many years, since 2003, 2004, tried to fight the Shiites especially, not the American occupation, the Shiites inside Iraq. This is the main goal of this organization at the beginning, to fight the Shiites. And they are destroyed by the Americans in 2006. Their leader is killed, and for several years they disappear from the map. And then all of a sudden we see them in June 2014. How is it? As I said, they took advantage of the civil war in Syria. They took the territory that gave them the resources and the territorial control that permitted them to enter or re-enter Iraq, and they were using the alliance with Sunni tribes in Iraq. Because what convinced the Sunnis in Iraq to participate with the ISIS against the government in Baghdad was the repressive policy of the Shia Maliki government in Baghdad. For years, this government did not permit the Sunnis to have a part in the national cake, in the riches of the oil in Iraq, and also in the administration and the political level. So the ISIS success is, if you want, a process which began in Syria, which is connected with the insurgency of tribes and even Ba'athists. Ba'athists, you know, people which were the nomenclatura of the Saddam Hussein regime. Together with the ISIS, they were the force that destroyed practically on the ground the Iraqi Shia army. And this explains why Mosul and then most of the cities in the Sunni region fell like a house of cards. In several weeks, this organization, together with most of the tribes and together with the Ba'athists, succeeded in occupying a third of the Iraqi territory. I won't speak about this now, we don't have time, but if you look to the map, you see, here is the map of Syria. The Syrian government decided that this part of western Syria is the main territory that they need to control because they simply cannot control the Sunni hinterland. So they renounced to control. This is the Kurdish territory. You see 3 enclaves, 3 cantons, which became autonomous. And this is the territory that the ISIS, beginning of 2014, controlled. Controlled not only the territory, the oil resources, which are here more or less, Deir ez-Zor. Okay? So, in fact, there was also a conspiracy theory saying that the government was cooperating with the ISIS in order to fight the opposition. It is not true. It simply did not have the force to defend more than this territory. And they concentrated their fight here. You see here more in detail, you see this is the region where the fighting of the opposition is concentrated. And here you have the Israeli border, the Golan, and here you have the Jabhat al-Nusra, which is, as I said, the real Al-Qaeda in Syria, not the ISIS. And you have also thousands of foreign fighters. This is an old statistic of foreign fighters. If you look to the new statistic, you have 1,500 Moroccans, 2,500 Tunisians, 1,500 Saudis, 1,000 French fighters, 500 Germans, 200 you see from Netherlands. These already are figures which are not true, in the sense that there are more fighters coming to fight, especially in Syria, not in Iraq. They are fighting in Syria. In Iraq, most of the fighters are Iraqi, from the ISIS, from Ba'athists, and the tribes. So what is the problem? Why the West is afraid? Because these kind of foreign fighters, and I speak not only about the Western, but also those from Morocco, those from Algeria, those from Tunisia, can return to their countries and to become fighters or terrorists in attacking the countries of origin. We have this experience already after Bosnia, the liberation of Bosnia, after the conflict in Chechnya, and after the first conflict in Afghanistan, that thousands of these kind of fighters return home, and they are organizing these terrorist acts like the one in Madrid in 2004, in London twice in 2005, and a lot of other attempts. Fortunately, many of them were foiled. So this is also producing a radicalization of entire communities sometimes that are influenced by what we see now in Syria and Iraq. You heard only yesterday what happened in Canada. And 3 days ago also, you have 2 converts, 2 citizens of Canada, which decide all of a sudden to attack the parliament or to attack Canadian soldiers. Why? All what they see on the internet, what they see on TV, influences these people. So the fight against the ISIS, and I won't speak about now about what has to be done. We have a discussion, I hope we'll have time to do it, is the fight from the point of the West to stop this kind of wave of terrorism, which will be very difficult to do as long, especially, as there is a territorial control of the ISIS and other jihadists in Syria and Iraq. Now, here you have the influence of the local, as I said, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. Everyone has different strategies and policies. The Turks are very influential because they have the longest border and because they supported another organization called the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a political organization. But because this organization was not able to fight on the ground, they began to support indirectly the jihadists, al-Nusra, and perhaps even the ISIS. So Turkey is responsible in great measure of what happens today. And we saw that the moment the ISIS is fighting Kobani, this territory here, against the Kurds, Turkey does not want to support them. Why? Because Turkey itself has its own problem of the Kurdish people. Some 50 million citizens of Turkey are Kurds. And you see what happened in Turkey as a result of this conflict. 40 people killed in manifestations, violent manifestations, and Turkey decides to bomb the PKK, the Kurds, not the ISIS, and asking the United States and NATO to support them to build a no-fly zone and to fight against the Assad regime. Then you have, you see, Iraq, which until lately supported this, the flow of arms and fighters from Iraq and Iran to Syria here. Now it stopped because the ISIS is controlling this border. It's very difficult now for the Iraqis to do it. And you have Jordan, which has 1 million refugees from Syria, which is supporting mainly the opposition here on our border, on the Jordanian border. And we have Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which are here on the Gulf, which are supporting a lot of Islamists, some support of jihadists. So you see how complicated is this picture when the United States and the West actually are not involved. Practically, they decided not to support the opposition because from the beginning they were very skeptical what will happen. But meantime, what happened is that Golem, if you want a monster, the ISIS has resulted of this kind of lack of policy. And here you have the territory, I think Jonathan will give more details, that is what is called the Islamic State or the Caliphate, that this organization has now under control. You see, it's a lot of desert here. Not there are many people, but the main regions here, you see Raqqa and the oil fields, and also oil fields here inside Iraq are in the hands of this organization. This organization, by occupying Mosul, has put the hands of $460 million cash in the banks of Mosul. This organization is selling oil at a quarter of price, but keeping practically financing a lot of foreign fighters, motivating people, and building also a civil infrastructure which will help them, if they succeed to survive, to build a caliphate. They need to build a caliphate. So they are asking for engineers, doctors from all the world, I mean Muslims, to come and to support them to build the caliphate. And people arrive there, unfortunately. This is the last, if you want, information that we had about the bombings. But for the moment, the bombings of the Americans are not precise, are not effective. We saw that only lately, the last days, they succeeded in stopping the attack on the Kobane Kurdish important town here. You see, on the Turkish border, not more than that for the moment. And here, what they are controlling in Iraq. What is important also is to see that they are controlling also part of the facilities of the Saddam Hussein regime, which had chemical weapons. These facilities, you see, were destroyed by the international community in the late 90s. But all of a sudden, it appears that the ISIS used chemical weapons against the Kurds in July. So probably they still found here in these destroyed facilities some kind of chemical weapons, okay? And at the same time, the Syrian regime, not only they used in August 2013 the big attack against the opposition. Remember the 1,400 bodies on the streets of the southern Damascus, but during April this year, they made a lot of attacks with chlorine, which is not a so poisonous gas like mustard gas or like sarin gas, but still it is a poison. But this was used for tactical reason as a terror weapon to expel population from the big cities or the opposition, the rebels from some of the cities. And although, according to the first information, they destroy all of their chemical facilities, we know from the last information of the Americans and the British that they didn't destroy at least 4 facilities of chemical weapons. So we see on the background of the big mess that we have in this region, the possibility that terrorist organizations have also put their hands on chemical weapons. I don't say that this is a threat to the West, but here it's clear a threat to the region. So what happens now is actually an attempt by the United States to build a big coalition, but as we saw, the coalition is very composite. There are a lot of conflicting interests. Turkey has different interests than Saudi Arabia. Qatar is trying to be independent, but is under pressure of the Saudis not to support the jihadists. Iraqi government, a Shia Iraqi government, has its own interest. Iran is trying to intervene and to fight the Sunni jihadists, but it has his own, if you want, negative impact in Syria and in Iraq. So on this very complex background, it will be very, very difficult to destroy, first of all, militarily the Islamic State or the Caliphate. And then, the moment that they will be destroyed, in my opinion, there will be success of the coalition in the end, but then you will have the problem of how the terrorism of these people, which are defeated on the ground in Syria and Iraq, will return not only to Morocco and to Tunisia, but they return to Australia, to Canada, and to Europe, and they can become the future terrorists in the near future. So for the moment, we'll leave other questions that will be raised by my friend Jonathan and for the general discussion. Thank you.
Well, thank you. The battlefield is, on one hand, based on the centuries-old alliances and ethnicities and confessions. On the other hand, what Ali just described and the number of organizations and alliances and shifting alliances, shifting every month, then you would not say that this has been description of the only last 3 years. And this is basically the reality on the ground, which is based on the broader long-term shifts, but also on everyday moves. By that, I would like to move to Jonathan, who has been one of the scholars and journalists who has visited repeatedly Syria, Turkey, and Iraq and the battlefields there. So we can talk from his own impressions on the ground. Jonathan has been affiliated with the Gloria Institute in Israel. He has not been my teacher, but as a good British, he's a good beer drinker, so he's been a good beer drinking companion. Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction in particular. Let me just check I'm in charge of the technology here, and then I can, yes, very good. Okay, good. So what I want to try to do in this next 20 minutes, possibly a little bit going over some of the ground which was covered in the first talk by my distinguished colleague, but I hope also giving some additional thoughts, is to look at the war currently taking place, first of all in Syria and then in Iraq, to do a little bit of an overview of who is fighting who, and then to go on to look in a little bit more detail also at the most recent flashpoints. Where exactly is the action taking place in the present time? Just to reiterate with regard to myself, as Thomas very kindly pointed out, I have carried out a number of reporting assignments into Syria and into Iraq over the last 3 years. The last one was 2 months ago into the northern part of the battlefield around here, both Syria and Iraq, and I'll be happy to talk in more detail about that later on if people would like me to do so. So first of all, then I want to just reiterate exactly who is fighting who. But before I do so, let's ask the following question. What we have here in this map is an example of fragmentation. We have a number of, as you can see from the various colors, a number of different camps dividing up what was once 2 clear countries. This one Syria, and this one is Iraq. First of all, we need to understand, how did it come about? How did this fragmentation come into being? And so we should bear in mind the following date, at which, in effect, the fragmentation of these 2 countries begins. In July 2012, in the summer of 2012, the Syrian regime, understanding that it can no longer command sufficient manpower to hope to reconquer the entirety of Syrian territory, effectively carries out a strategic withdrawal, pulling back to new lines in the south and west of the country, which creating a smaller entity which it can rule, and thereby bringing into being a kind of de facto partition of Syria. Just so we understand correctly who is fighting who in this partitioned line, this pink area you can see here, this is the area controlled, that's to say this area here, by Bashar Assad, the thing which still calls itself the legitimate government of Syria. These very small, you can hardly see it, unfortunately, the color is not so good, but these small areas here and down here are what remains of the area, once the area controlled by the people who call themselves, who are still called the rebels, the Sunni rebellion. These areas here, and a little bit remaining here, that's Kobani, are the enclaves controlled by the Kurds, which Eli was talking about, also coming into being in July 2012. And this massive, but not very large, but not heavily populated area in grey, this one here, is the area controlled now by the organization Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or Islamic State, or ISIS, or ISIL. But important to remember, prior to it coming under their control, this grey area, it was largely under the control of the Sunni rebels. That is to say, ISIS took that area, for the most part, not from the Assad regime, but from the Sunni rebels. So, July 2012, Assad pulls down to this area here, the better to defend it, and these other areas, then rebels, now ISIS, the Kurds, and the rebels come into being, and the situation is effectively partitioned. Now here's an important thing, a crucial thing to understand. Since July 2012 and up until today, more than 100,000 people have lost their lives in the context of the Syrian war. But the lines have hardly moved. The lines have largely stayed static. The forces have been fighting for control of these lines, each one trying to push into the other, each one failing to do so. The Syrian war has been at stalemate effectively since summer 2012, and it remains at stalemate now. No side is strong enough to win, no side is so weak that it is about to lose. What do we therefore understand from that? We can begin to draw the following conclusion. Syria today is effectively a state that no longer exists. It is rather a geographical expression. It essentially means this area of land which we are talking about, but not a state. And within that area of land, there are a number of successor entities fighting one another for control of the ground, for the greatest amount of territory that they can hope for. And the Assad regime, remember the pink group, is no more, in my estimation or my analysis, than one more successor entity. It is no longer, in any legitimate sense, the government of Syria. So the lines remain largely static, the sides are fighting, but nothing is really moving. This situation effectively continues until, I would say, until the middle of this year. And what takes place in the middle of this year is not that the lines begin to move, but rather that the war, following the same dynamic of ethnic and sectarian conflict, bursts its borders, the borders of Syria, and erupts into Iraq, effectively creating a parallel situation today to the situation in Syria, existing in larger neighboring Iraq, in which we have the Islamic State here, having burst its borders and pushed eastwards. Here we have the Kurdish regional government, a very large autonomous Kurdish entity that has existed in one form or another since 1992, and again, parallel to the thing that still calls itself the government of Syria down here, we have a thing which still calls itself the government of Iraq down here. But important for me to note and stress, in my analysis at least, I speak not for the government, only for myself as a journalist and analyst, but in my analysis at least, this entity here does not have some automatic moral superiority or authority to any of the other entities. It is one more successor entity. It is the entity effectively representing the Shia of Iraq, as opposed to the Sunnis over here and the Kurds over here. So what then is the basis for this fragmented map? Who is represented in this? On what basis have these lines emerged? Well, they have emerged, of course, as lines of force. But who are the various forces engaging against one another? This map is a map of ethnic and sectarian difference. It is not simply a map of interest against interest. All of the entities which you can see mapped out there are entities representing one or another of the map, the complex map of sectarian and ethnic identities which went unsuccessfully to make up the states which for many decades were known to all of us as Iraq and Syria. That is to say, the essential logic of this war is a logic of ethnic and sectarian conflict, in which, and this is a crucial point to understand, in which countries ruled for decades by strong and powerful police states, which never succeeded in developing real and generally accepted notions of citizenship and nationality, these regimes having been either destroyed in the Iraqi case or weakened in the Syrian case, having withdrawn, these older identities are now reasserting themselves and are now fighting over the ruins of these two countries in an effort to give birth to new entities and new countries potentially more representative of the people's actual identities. And if I can define what is taking place in Syria and Iraq today in as few words as possible, that is the way that I would describe it. That is the key dynamic that you need to bear in mind when looking at this complex map of all sorts of different crisscrossing identities. Understanding that essential logic, I would say, is vital to understanding what is taking place. What I'd like to move on to look at then now in the next couple of minutes is where exactly the main fighting is taking place. What is moving in this battlefield? Because yes, the lines in Syria, and even in Iraq a little bit, are to some degree static, or in Syria they are static, in Iraq less so, but there are nevertheless areas of kinetic action taking place which can perhaps offer us a clue as to the direction of events in this ongoing conflict. First of all, it is important to make clear that the war is no longer confined to Syria and Iraq itself. On the contrary, you can see this little country down here, which is Lebanon. You can see that the fighting is also beginning to, or you can't see, but I'm about to tell you, that the fighting is also erupting into Lebanon. What is happening is that one of the areas of conflict, I'm trying to make sure I'm pointing at just about here, is taking place, because you can see a little bit of green there if you have very good eyesight, better than mine. That green represents a small area of rebel control that still exists along the Syrian-Lebanese border. And the government of Syria, together with its Hezbollah ally, is trying to wipe out that area of control, and they're not being successful in doing so. And so the forces here, the Sunni forces, Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS, are doing their best to push across into into Lebanon to link up with the Sunnis in Lebanon, without necessarily needing to understand all the various aspects of this. You should understand simply the following. What Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS are trying to do is they are trying to introduce the logic of Syria and Iraq into Lebanon. They're trying to extend the ethnic and sectarian war taking place in Syria and Iraq into Lebanon. And the other side, Hezbollah and the Assad regime, are doing their level best to prevent that, not because they have something better to offer Lebanon, but because they themselves are currently dominant in Lebanon, and they wish for that domination to continue, and therefore they're doing their level best to prevent it. So one area of crucial conflict to bear in mind, right here on the Syrian-Lebanese border, between the rebels of Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS and the forces of the regime. Another crucial area to bear in mind, up here, Kobani, which of course you hear about in your news broadcasts on a daily basis, I would imagine. I visited Kobani in this area here in May. It is the second of the Kurdish enclaves to have emerged in July 2012. The Kurds are currently fighting for their lives, of course, against an ISIS attempt to destroy that enclave. Excuse me. Important to understand from this relatively updated map that, as you can see, the Kobani enclave is almost gone. This is the Kurdish color, remember? Green. Here, there's hardly any green. If you had looked at the map 3 months ago, you would have seen a big and respectable green triangle stretching down here and up to here. But most of it has now gone because ISIS have managed to destroy it. The Kurds are fighting for their lives there. Importantly, they are succeeding now in holding on to the town of Kobani and preventing what would certainly be an enormous massacre were ISIS, thank you, to push in there, and they're doing so with the help of United States air cover. So we looked first of all at the Syrian-Lebanese border, secondly at Kobani. Where else is important is the fighting moving? What else is taking place? There is also an attempt by the regime down here in Damascus and up here in Aleppo to push back against the rebels, using as a smokescreen, so to speak, the increasing American air action taking place against ISIS. The Syrian regime assumes, and probably correctly, that for as long as the media cameras of the world are focused on ISIS, it can get away with a great deal of what it enjoys to do. And as a result, the regime has massively increased in recent weeks the number of sorties, of air bombings it is carrying out, largely against the civilian population living in rebel-controlled areas. That's taking place in Damascus and also in Aleppo. And finally, in terms of the area which I wish to focus on, this here is Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. And this is areas controlled by the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or Islamic State. As you can see, it has carried out a very successful offensive, which has taken it to within perhaps between 20 and 30 kilometers of the Iraqi capital. This means, should the Islamic State push much further forward, it will certainly have Baghdad within range of its mortars, and the Iraqi capital will begin to suffer from bombardment of the Islamic State. Here in Iraq, the battlefield is far more mobile and fluid than in Syria. And we are seeing up here in the north against the Kurds a rapidly moving battlefield in which ISIS advances, is pushed back, and advances again. Up here in the Rabia, they were pushed back recently. Sinjar Mountain, you probably heard of, is here. This is the Iraqi Kurdish capital of Erbil, which would almost certainly have fallen to ISIS had the United States Air Force not intervened on August 8th. So a fluid battlefield up here, threatening to the Iraqi capital down here, and an ongoing fight in a number of different areas. As I said, also Rabia, Sinjar up here, and a number of other areas. This is Fallujah province, Anbar province, by the way. This is the city of Fallujah here, which is currently under dispute. You can see that there is an Iraqi sort of enclave there, which is where the Iraqis are holding on to a number of strategically important areas, including, most importantly, the Haditha Dam, which provides the water for Baghdad and much of central Iraq. So the fight is on. The Islamic State is pushing forward. But on this, I want to move towards a number of concluding remarks regarding where things may be headed. First of all, the American intervention has ensured, in my estimation, that ISIS will not manage to spread that much further into Iraq or into Syria, which means that this map is likely to remain somewhat relevant for some time to come. But it is crucial for all of us to understand that, especially as we move into the stage of discussion and debate also this evening, but also more in general, that the Western air campaign, the coalition air campaign against Islamic State, as currently constituted, is very clearly not of sufficient dimension to carry out the stated goal of the United States President, namely to degrade and destroy the Islamic State. Or let me put it even more sharply, the air campaign as currently constituted is sufficient to degrade the Islamic State. It is not sufficient to destroy it. In order to destroy the Islamic State, and you can see the grey, that is the Islamic State, what you need is not only force from the air, but also force from the ground. History does not offer examples of states which have been destroyed from the air alone. And the problem facing the coalition, the question which all of us as Western citizens, so to speak, need to consider, is that the Americans and the West, with regard to Syria, not necessarily with regard to Iraq, do not have a partner on the ground for that ground action. Because the Syrian rebellion is in disarray, the Kurdish forces are not willing to engage against the Islamic State in its own areas at least, and of course the Assad army and Hezbollah are enemies of the West. This is a central dilemma currently facing Western policy. I don't claim to have a simple answer to it, or even any answer to it. I don't think there is an obvious answer to it. But it is a question which we absolutely have to ask ourselves. And in asking that question, and on this I'll conclude, we also need to ask ourselves what is the precise nature of this conflict, and what is the Western interest in it. At the beginning of this talk, I tried to offer an outline of this conflict, which sees it as an ethnic and sectarian conflict. And I reiterate that. This is ultimately a fight between two different versions of political Islam, Sunni political Islam and Shia political Islam, fighting over the ruins of ruined states and ruined regimes. I can give you my own 2 cents worth, and on this I'll conclude. In my estimation, the West does not have an interest in the victory of either side, and therefore it is not in the interests of the West to get heavily involved on the ground with a cost in lives, because neither in backing Shia political Islam nor in backing Sunni political Islam would we actually be backing not only the interests of the West, but also the interests of greater rights and representative government, which ought to also underlie our policies. And therefore, in my own estimation, strange as it may seem, I find myself largely in agreement with the American government. It doesn't happen all the time, and with President Obama. I think that by going all the wrong ways possible, he has finally arrived, actually, at a relatively rational policy, namely a minimalist policy in which the Islamic State is being restricted, is being intimidated, is being degraded, but too high a price is not being paid, which could end up benefiting the Iranians, as has happened in the past with US policies in this area. For example, the invasion of Iraq in 2003. And on that happy and hopefully controversial note, I'll conclude, and I'll be happy to take your questions and discussions afterwards. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Now I would like to invite General Kovanda, not primarily because of his position as the former head of the military intelligence, but because of his position as the former head of the special forces, our special forces fighting in Afghanistan. Because this theater, this war theater, is slightly different than the Afghani theater, but there are many, many similarities and probably many lessons to be learned of what can we achieve, under which circumstances we can, as the West, achieve something, what is our fight, what is not our fight, and how the situation on the battlefield, as broad as it is, can be in the future. So the main question is, what are the lessons learned from Afghanistan, from our counterinsurgency operations in Afghanistan, and based on that, what we can see, what the battlefield in Iraq, Syria, possibly Iraq, Syria, Lebanon will look like from our perspective, and what, if we have a policy, or if we don't, or if President Obama has a policy, what he can achieve by formulating the policy, and what he can carry on no matter what he wishes. General Kovanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here on this seminar. Before I start, I will just say a little bit about myself. I have spent all my professional life in the military. which is almost 25 years. And during my military service, I've done 4 operational tours, one in Kosovo in 1999 as a deputy commander of Czech reconnaissance company. And then I did 3 tours in Afghanistan. First was in 2004 as a chief of operational staff of Czech Special Operations Task Force. And then in 2008 and 9, again in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. At this time I was as a commander of Czech Special Operations Task Group. Today I will speak about the counterinsurgency in Afghanistan, about our lessons learned, and what lessons we actually learned in fighting insurgents. Fighting the insurgents is a very complex campaign, which includes many aspects of operation, and not only from the military point of view. Fighting the insurgents requires solutions in many other spheres, like political, economical, judicial. And as a soldier, I will focus on the military aspects of the counterinsurgency. Okay, here we go. Yeah. You know? Right. Okay, first, before I will go, I would like to talk a little bit, just really a little bit about the history. And as you can see, this is the road to insurgency in Afghanistan. After the Russian withdrawal from Afghanistan after 1989, actually Afghanistan as a country was left in ruins. And there was no law and order. And as soon as there were a lot of various mujahideen groups who were fighting the Russians, and once they forced them out, they turned the weapons against each other and they started a civil war. So that actually the Afghanistan as a country got even deeper into the deeper turmoil. Then in 1996, suddenly the Taliban stepped in, ended the civil war, and imposed the law and order under Sharia law. After 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States, US-led coalition launched airstrikes in order to topple and destroy Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Taliban regime provided for Al-Qaeda sanctuary from which they could plan and execute operations abroad. The sanctuary is a place which we can generally describe as a or safe haven from where the terrorists they need as a safe haven for to have a shelter, from where they can take the supplies, when they can heal their wounded. This is actually the place where they can feel very safe. So the question really was what was happening with the Taliban. Taliban, was he destroyed? Was the Taliban defeated, or was the Taliban disrupted? From military point of view, Taliban was defeated at this time. It was disrupted, but Taliban was not destroyed. So what really happened with the Taliban? Many Taliban members, they fled. They actually, after the air campaign and the push of the Northern Alliance South, mostly the senior and middle level of the leadership, they fled to Pakistan, to the neighboring federally administrated tribal area. Many Taliban members, they just simply gave up, but mostly the Taliban melted into the local population. What was not achieved? Since 2001, the Taliban had enough space and time to regroup, to rearm, and most important, adopt a new strategy. They found safe place, as I mentioned before, behind the borders in neighboring Pakistan Fatah region, which is predominantly the Pashtun area. Taliban realized they don't stand a chance in open confrontation against the formidable enemy, which is the US-led coalition. which had a superiority in weaponry, technology, manpower. So they had to realize what kind of strategy they will adopt, and they adopted the strategy which is called insurgency. So they switch actually from the open confrontation into insurgency, which can be described as a guerrilla-style war or rebellion. So about 2005 and 2006, they moved back in small teams, small groups, back to Afghanistan, and they conducted the offensive operations based on the hit-and-run tactics. They used ambushes, they used the IED strikes, which means the improvised explosive devices strikes. They used the assassinations, kidnapping, intimidations. The Taliban infiltrated newly trained and built Afghan national security forces. All this was happening mostly in the areas with support of the Pashtun local population, which is mostly in the east and south. Taliban since that has been quite effective. They inflicted quite heavy casualties and most importantly gained the ground in some areas, as I mentioned, in the east and south. And thus they again achieved and reached to the local population, and again they on some places received the support. It was more than obvious for the coalition forces that they have to make a change in the strategy as well, because in the insurgency, counterinsurgency, the tactics of finding, fixing, and finishing the enemy simply doesn't work. So they have to be switched to the strategy, which was in this case to actually clear the area, hold the area, and finally build the area. As mentioned before, the insurgents thrive if the fighters they have a safe haven place, sanctuary, where they can feel safe, where the resources are available or can be simply obtained. Local population provides plenty of that, but it doesn't mean that they have to do the support willingly. In most cases, the Afghans are simply tired of the war. They don't want they lived through the wars for last 30 years, and they just have enough. So what they want and what they need is the stability, is the security. They want to do their farmings. They want to sustain their families. They want the education for their kids. And only what they need for this is stability and security. So who is going to provide this stability and security? Is it going to be a winner? Is it going to be the coalition forces, or is it going to be the Taliban? Who's going to provide it? He's making the progress. To provide the security and stability, it requires a time. It requires the time, patience, and huge resources, because what we are actually building, we are building the trust. If locals trust us, they will turn to us. Because they will realize that they are better off without radical Taliban. However, coalition forces cannot stay in Afghanistan forever. So the most important task, and one of the most important tasks in counterinsurgency, is to build, train, support, conduct operations together with the Afghan national forces. So it also requires a lot of time, resources, and also the local population must get a trust into the Afghan national security forces. The most important thing, one of the important things, is to realize that in counterinsurgency, the coalition forces, specifically in Afghanistan, they will not kill all the enemy. Never, ever. The most important thing is to fight the enemy if the enemy gets between coalition forces and the local population. Because the main, let's call it, target audience is the local population. If they accept you, if they believe you, they will turn to you and they will reject the Taliban. So, between our soldiers, we say, if you want to defeat the Taliban or insurgency, you have to cut the umbilical cord, which means detach the local population from the insurgents. If we succeed in this, what will happen? What will the insurgents do? Well, some of them will give up, because if there is no sanctuary, the insurgency simply crumbles. Well, some of them will move somewhere else when they can obtain the resources, and they will continue in their fight. And very important question is to destroy insurgency. First is deny sanctuary, and second is destroy ideology of radical extremism. Well, in the second thing, destroy the ideology, well, I don't dare to answer this question right now, because simply there are no simple answers for that, how to do it. But it raises the question, so what? What are we going to do with that? Well, based on my personal experience, I would say that we did exactly the same thing like I tried to explain. In 2004, we deployed to Afghanistan, and our main primary mission was to kill or capture enemy. So we were focused on the strategy, find, fix, and finish the enemy. Well, after that, when we returned there in 2008 and 2009, well, we just realized that, simply as I said, we will never ever achieve killing all the enemy. So we switched the strategy from the kill or capture to hold, build, clear, hold, and build. And so we moved into the remote area in Afghanistan, into area which was like a bowl, and there was about 15,000 people living there. So we stayed there. We stayed there for 18 months. We worked with them. We brought with us the Afghan National Army, which we trained in a place. We conducted operations together with the Afghans. We reached to the local population. We took care of them, mostly in the harsh winter seasons, when you have a minus 25 degrees, there is a lot of snow, and they have little food. So this is how we try to build the trust. I can say that we achieved something. We definitely were able to detach the Taliban. The Taliban realized that what was once theirs, so they could come to this area and take the resources from the locals. They couldn't do it anymore. Well, some of them just gave up. They put the weapons down and they melted into the population. Some of them definitely moved somewhere else because their ideology remains. Okay. Problem is the ISIS. I'm not really expert. I don't see myself to be much more prepared for that than my colleagues. However, I consider the ISIS problem as a much more complex, with much more dynamics than the one which is in Afghanistan. But we can see some similarities which we saw in the Taliban with the Taliban in Afghanistan. ISIS, like the Taliban once, is right now controlling the ground. ISIS is organized, is structured, is funded, and is implementing their version of law and order and enjoys the freedom of movement. As well as the Taliban, after the 9/11, right now, the ISIS is facing the airstrikes. If the objective is to bring down the ISIS, the ground engagement must follow, and the ground troops are needed. Taliban was forced out of the Afghanistan by joint effort in the air and on the ground. If that happens, my personal opinion is that the ISIS might switch to the same strategy like the Taliban did in 2005 and 2006. They will definitely realize they don't stand a chance against whoever provides the ground forces. And I think that what they will do, they will try to adopt some kind of insurgency operations. They will move in smaller teams. I don't expect, from my personal view, that we would see any more convoys running, 25 vehicles full of the ISIS fighters with the flags. And they will implement the tactics of hit and run, IED strikes, intimidations, assassinations. And anyway, if there is a will and appetite to solve the problem, it will take a long time. Definitely a long time. It will require the huge resources, an integrated strategy. Integrated, mostly I mean international. ISIS, like Taliban, cannot be solved only by military. The ISIS strategy vision involves the first establishing control over territory through military conquest, and then reinforcing this control through governance. However, military conquest right now is a key part in ISIS' long-term strategy. It's important to understand that in this there are no quick fixes. We can quickly only contain these problems to some degree. A couple of things at the end. To solve the Taliban, Pakistan must be solved, because the Pakistan provides in a fairly administrated tribal areas, it provides the sanctuary. This is the place when the Taliban right now can move. They will move there definitely through the winter. They will stay there, they will regroup, they will rearm, and in the spring they will move back to Afghanistan. The same thing is, I believe, with the ISIS. Syria and Iraq must be solved. There's one thing which a little bit differs, and this is the Taliban fights because they think that their country was taken them away by a US-led coalition. So they are fighting to get Afghanistan back. However, ISIS is setting back up its ground, its state, for further expansion. In reality, if sanctuary is denied, it will move somewhere else. Well, it's more than 20 minutes? No? Exactly. That's all from my point. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, before I pass the floor to your questions or very sharp and short comments, I want Ellie and Jonathan to briefly react on what has been said, since I think there is an agreement that the airstrikes can do the containment of the battlefield situation on the ground, but they cannot defeat Islamic State or whatever entity is on the ground. Without boots on the ground, without the ability to hold the territory, you are not able to you are not going to be able to proceed. And when I mean boots on the ground, it means the armies. I don't mean the special forces pinpointing the operations of the airstrikes which may be there. There is not going to be any Western country which will put boots on the ground in sufficient numbers. So it will be on the locals from the region and on the locals from the ground. We have the volatile situation on the Shiite-Sunni divide in Iraq, but let's say the Shiites can do some fighting and some advances to the areas where there has been already some in the past, or where there is still now some kind of Shiite community. The Kurds can do some fighting, they can hold on to their territory, and they can advance or recapture the places where the Kurds used to live, and maybe some other minorities. But the whole territory of Islamic State, as it was seen on the map, is basically the Sunni tribal area. So what is the strategy and what can happen there? Is the search of General Petraeus years ago going to be replicated in Iraq? Can the same be replicated in Syria, that you have the tribes who are doing the fighting because they are the locals and they do want to rule themselves? What is the sequence and what can be the battlefield at the moment when we are using only the air power and to a limited extent, where no one is going to put boots on the ground, and where the fighting has to be done for those from the side of those who wish to control the territory, no matter what territory it is?
Indeed, there is one process which is the big conflict between Sunnis and Shiites, and there is a difference between the Sunni and Shia camp, because in the Shia camp there is a clear head of the coalition, which is Iran, which has the resources, the ideology, the manpower, and the military hardware to advance the interest of the Shia coalition. The problem with the Sunni coalition, although it's a bigger one, is the conflict between the three countries which want to lead the coalition. One is Turkey, which wants to rebuild Ottoman Empire, then Saudi Arabia, which wants to be the real representative of the Sunni faith, and the Egyptians were with a new regime, military regime, actually want to retake the leadership of the Arab world. And this is the problem for the unification of this camp. But inside this kind of big conflict, there is another conflict which I call Balkanization. As the Yugoslav Republic was dismantled with acceptance, by the way, of NATO, United States, and European countries. And you have now Bosnia, you have Kosovo, you have Croatia and Slovenia. Why not accept the Balkanization process in the Middle East? Because the other possibility is you have failed states. There is a process of failed states that we cannot accept, because failed states we see are a hotbed for terrorism and insurgency in the region and outside. Actually, I think that the international community cannot accept the non-activity. And I don't speak about who is boots on the ground. There is no vacuum in international relations. We saw what happened in Somalia when the United States, because one helicopter of the army was down there, they left Somalia. For 20 years, it has taken to the international community to change the situation in Somalia. How? A lot of politics, but a lot of military activity by the African Union. Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia were involved and still are involved there. And Somalia is not exactly what was 5 years ago. The same if we speak about Afghanistan. And here I want to refer to the issue of your proposal. What is first? Ideology and also politics, because what was the Taliban? Taliban were 4,000 students in Pakistani madrasas, religious schools which inculcated them with very radical ideology. And the military, and especially the intelligence of Pakistan, sent them to conquer Afghanistan. And they conquered it with the support of Al-Qaeda and a lot of money and Pakistani support. So you said very rightly that we have to resolve the problem of Pakistan. Pakistan is a huge problem for international community, not only for India, because it's a nuclear state with a quarter of its territory a failed state, with an insurgency much worse than the Taliban in Afghanistan. So this is one of the problems that we don't have time to discuss, but it is a huge problem. And in Algeria, the Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb was destroyed by the Algerian regime. And in Mali, the international community did not permit the formation of an Islamic state in Timbuktu. The French, with the support again of the African troops, they destroyed practically the advance of these jihadists of Akim, the Tuaregs and so on, and now there is a kind of reshaping of the region. So I think that the Iraqi situation can be improved in the sense that you spoke about the Petraeus surge. I think this is the solution. But this is a solution which, on the one hand, needs a compromise from the Shia government and the Shia community, one thing, and then agreement, a deal with the Sunni tribes and even with the Ba'athists to stop the Ba'athization, which was actually a repression of the Sunnis, and to try to regain the support of the Sunni population, the majority of the Sunni population, against the ISIS. And this, in my opinion, can change the situation. The problem remains with Syria. Because the Syrian situation, the Sunni situation, or the Sunni community is so divided, so dispersed also physically, that it is very difficult to solve or to find a solution, especially, as I said, that there is a conflict between Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the West. But in my opinion, if the Iraqis problem is solved, and this should be the first priority, then the Syrian problem will remain. It will be easier in the longer term to try to solve it by political pressure, by support, incentives, economic incentives, and so on.
Yeah, in response also to your very interesting remarks, General, I also want to relate to one of your very final points regarding the issue of that only if the ideology is ultimately defeated can progress be made, so to speak. I very much endorse that, and I'd like to say the following. First of all, I think if if the experience of the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq, the Western wars, I mean, of the last decade, proves anything, I think what it proves is that we as Westerners are not capable of defeating locally grown ideologies. We can defeat locally grown military forces, certainly. Ideologies we cannot. Now, at least in my estimation, as I tried to outline during my talk, what is taking place currently in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, in my estimation, is a war of succession which is replacing two or arguably three failed states. And the most central players in those wars of succession are ideological camps as well as power camps. Ideological camps representing two very similar ideas, but rival ideas: Sunni political Islam and Shia political Islam. Now, it is my contention, almost whether we like it or whether we don't, that this is a process which is going to have to play itself out. That is to say, these forces have collided. It is a matter of historical dimensions, not merely of a passing episode. And the collision of these two forces is has already rearranged and may well be on the way to permanently rearranging the map of the area in question. This is taking place, and it will need to play itself out, and these ideologies, as other ideologies that preceded them, will need to clash, will need to win or lose, and will need then to play themselves out, to be tried, to fail in many of the tests of real life, as it is the tendency of ideologies to do, and then to decline as part of that natural process. We as Westerners then, I think, have to ask ourselves the following question: what is our interest in terms of these wars, and what can we do? In terms of our interests, there are certain vital economic interests, as I see it at least, in Iraq. Investments of Western companies, and I make no apology about this. There's a funny, rather naive view which exists in some parts of Western Europe at least, that you should never have wars for oil, you should never have wars for resources. This, of course, is complete nonsense. We as taxpayers and citizens fully expect our elected governments to defend our economic interests, and part of that is defending investments. In oil-rich Iraq, there are a number of very vital Western investments, and it is quite natural that the United States government at the present time wishes to defend them, which is why it is defending Iraq very determinedly from the advance of the Islamic State. Good. We need to defend our economic interest. Beyond that, what else are we required to do with regard to this Sunni-Shia political clash? My own estimation is largely we would be well advised to keep out of the way as much as we can. Because actually, if we, for this or that misguided momentary mood, decide to intervene on the ground, and that morality requires us to intervene on the ground, what is likely to happen is that a large number of lives will be spent, of our own young people, very unlikely to bring about any conclusion which we would like the look of, because the fact of the matter is that these two local, homegrown ideologies and identities are going to battle it out, whether we like it or not, and one of them is going to win in this space, or both of them are going to partly win in this space, not anything else right now. There is currently no other real option. So this, I think, is a vital thought to bear in mind when we consider our options and our obligations also as Westerners. Just a couple of further points with regard to perhaps the more detailed issues of Syria and Iraq, which we touched upon. Thomas asked about the issue of a surge strategy, and can this succeed against Islamic State? My own estimation is this is a sensible idea, in the same way that I think the limited air campaign to contain Islamic State is a sensible idea. It strikes me as an extremely sensible use of our resources to try to invest in internal political troubles for the Islamic State. It's something which doesn't cost a huge amount of lives, or hopefully no lives at all from our own side, and it can certainly do some damage to a force that richly deserves to have damage done to it, namely Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and his friends who run the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. A downside to it is the price paid by those who are doing the rebelling, and I draw our attention to a tribal war currently taking place, not well reported, in the Deir az-Zor area of Syria between the Shaitat tribe, a local tribe, in rebellion against the Islamic State. And the Islamic State have executed, we think, around 700 civilian members of this tribe in the course of the last 4 weeks. Very poorly reported. So those who will take part in rebelling against the Islamic State will pay a very heavy price for doing so. That's regrettable. But Is it a sensible idea for us in the West to invest in the failure of the Islamic State if we're not ourselves going to go in and destroy it? My answer is absolutely yes. We want this dreadful entity to be as weak as possible, with one minor caveat, and let me conclude this little response on this, with one minor caveat. Do we actually want the Islamic State to be so weak that its enemies on the Iranian and Shia side are able to destroy it? Do we actually want the force that ends up going in with boots on the ground to the Islamic State area to be Hezbollah and the Iranians and their friends? Well, I would question very much whether we want that. So actually, we need to think also about the dreadful moral nature of the Islamic State, but also about the dreadful moral nature of the Islamic Republic of Iran and its various friends. By no means the moral superiors of Islamic State, according to any measure. We want both sides to be weak. We want both sides to be weakened. If both sides do us the great favor of spending a great deal of time weakening one another, that's not necessarily a bad thing from our point of view at all. And just to conclude, I think our thought should be, how do we strengthen our friends in the neighborhood? And there are friends. The Jordanians are friends. The Kurds are friends. I hope that we Israelis are friends also. There are plenty of pro-Western forces surrounding and in the periphery of this conflict arena. And these are the forces I would hope as Westerners that we are thinking about developing and supporting closer relationships with.
Thank you very much. The first question goes naturally to the Deputy Chairman of our Defense Committee of the Lower Chamber.
Dobrý večer, jmenuji se Chalupa, jsem tady za dolní komoru parlamentu České republiky. Děkuji za ty názory, které tady zazněly. Já jsem přišel kvůli tomu v podstatě, abych se dozvěděl víc něco o té ideologii, o džihádu. Nicméně jsem rád, že jsem se dozvěděl o té situaci, mapy a podobně. Chtěl jsem se zeptat, na těch mapách, zajímalo by mě, protože přistupuji k tomu problému protože se domnívám, že to, co se děje na území Iráku a Syrie, ovlivňuje bezpečnostní situaci na území České republiky. Včera byl problém v kanadském parlamentu, takže džihad probíhá a v podstatě globálně začínáme vést válku s džihádem nebo s těmi, kteří představují dneska ISIL. Nesouhlasím asi s tím, co tady bylo řečeno ohledně toho, že je otázka, do jaké míry vlastně chceme ten ISIL porazit úplně nebo jenom z části. Tomu moc nerozumím, protože za mě ISIL by měl být zničen definitivně, protože to je organizace, která asi nemá ekonomické zájmy a ten, kdo nemá ekonomické zájmy, nemá ani moc politické, má jenom ideologii náboženskou středověkou a s těma se vyjednávat nedá. Se všemi ostatními, kteří mají ekonomické zájmy, se dá asi na úrovni diplomacie nějakým způsobem ty věci řešit. Zeptám se, ISIL v jakém rozsahu má dneska pod kontrolou potravinovou základnu na území Iráku a Syrie a vodní zdroje, protože to je podle mě dost podstatné pro to, jak se to tam bude vyvíjet. Druhá otázka, bavíme se tady o ideologii a já jsem se domníval, že ten dnešní seminář bude pojednávat o tom, proč nebo z jakých důvodů i na území toho vyspělého západu dneska řada mladých lidí podléhá té ideologii jakéhosi náboženství, které, jak jsem řekl, je středověké. Protože pokud tohle nepochopíme a o tomhle se nebude diskutovat, tak se dostáváme asi do budoucna do velkých problémů. A třetí otázka by mě zajímalo, jaký potenciál má tato středověká ideologie, jak na území toho Iráku a Syrie, tam, kde ještě ISIL nezvítězil, jaký potenciál má na území například Afriky, Magrebu a podobně, a jaký potenciál má i na území tedy vyspělých západních států. Poněvadž tam, kde je poptávka po tom, o čem tady bylo hovořeno, to znamená, ty lidi tam chtějí konečně mít mír a normálně existovat a žít, takže pokud jim asi někdo tu poptávku splní, tak se dostáváme do velkého problému. Děkuju.
I am of the opinion that we have to destroy the Islamic State or the Caliphate, because if it will survive as a Caliphate, then it will sooner or later begin to march against its enemies. And I mean all of enemies, the Muslims and non-Muslims, because this is a raison d'etre of such a state. The means to do it are, as I tried to explain, first of all, prioritize the situation in Iraq. And we saw that there is a possibility also to press the Iraqi government. The Prime Minister Maliki was changed. There is now an attempt to make a deal with the Sunni. The new Minister of Defense is a Sunni. So this kind of political pressure and economic pressure and military support or non-support is working on the condition there is kind of decisive strategy, not zigzagging all the time. And then the issue of Syria is more complicated, but at the same time less perhaps threatening, because this is not a caliphate. Okay, the Sunnis in Syria did not build a caliphate for the moment. The second issue is the issue of ideology. You are right that the problem is that the success of such an organization is also the spread of the ideology beyond the borders of the caliphate. And we see it every day. By the way, they have already influence in Yemen, in Pakistan, in the Sahel. Some of the groups, not all, but some of them, they paid allegiance to the new caliph. They are ready to follow his orders or his directives. And in the West, we see also that how many young people are influenced by this. But let's look for one place. In the Great Britain, there is a jihadist, if you want, or Islamist radical leader. It's a convert, by the way. Chuderi, how do you call it? Ahmed Chuderi?
Yeah.
He was arrested. He was arrested by the authorities because he really is propagating the jihadism inside the Great Britain. 2 days, 3 days afterwards, he was liberated. And he continues to speak in the mosque, on the internet, on YouTube. So what this kind of, why accept this kind of human rights for such kind of people in our country? So there is more to do against these people. Finally, from the point of view of the West, it's more of an issue of counter-terrorism. And we saw that we were quite successful during the last years, since the attacks in Madrid and London, to stop and to foil most of the terrorist attacks. I think we'll continue to be successful if we will be united, cooperating, and more professional. The ideology, we cannot change it. It is clear for everybody that this change must come from within. As long as there will not be a change in the Muslim world, they will not advance in the modern world. They will advance, but they will become kind of failed states or aggressive states. So we must concentrate on supporting those which are, if are moderate, or those which are people who understand how the modern world is going, but at the same time prepare ourselves to stop terrorism. About the food and water, perhaps Jonathan can also...
Just I want to mention that once recently Qatar was finally squeezed by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to force some of the jihadists and Muslim brothers out of the country. Guess where they have been sent to and where they have been accepted? Turkey, a NATO member state, and United Kingdom, NATO and EU member state. Thankfully not the Schengen member state, I would add to it. Jonathan, the water, food, oil situation on the ground.
Well, I want to comment not only on that, but also. With regard to the issue of the first part of your question about whether or not one should seek the destruction of the Islamic State, let me be clear. I would be very happy if it vanished off the face of the earth. What I'm trying, however, to suggest is that the Islamic State is only one manifestation of very negative ideologies and ideas which exist in the area which we're discussing, Iraq and Syria. And I at the risk of being controversial, I suppose, I do very much wish to question the extent to which many of the enemies of the Islamic State in that space are its moral or ethical superior. Not because the Islamic State deserves any moral applause, but because many of the forces neighboring it and also fighting against it are equally dreadful, with an equally dreadful record with regard to murderousness and extremism and fanaticism and all the rest of it. Islamic State differs from Jabhat al-Nusra, for example, not particularly in its murderousness, but in the fact that Jabhat al-Nusra has not found it necessary, firstly, to declare a caliphate, but secondly, perhaps more germanely in terms of this discussion, to carry out executions of Western journalists and then film them and put them up on YouTube. This does not make the organization any less murderous. It still murders people. It still kills innocents. So I merely wish to suggest that when we look at the Islamic State, rather than having the notion that Syria and Iraq are perhaps essentially normal countries in which, unfortunately for them, it could happen to any of us, this dreadful entity has somehow descended from the stars called the Islamic State, we would better be advised to see the Islamic State as a manifestation of a broader problem which has other manifestations in the area, and some of those manifestations are actually fighting against the Islamic State. If we fail to attain that understanding, we run the risk of, out of our determination to destroy this dreadful thing called the Islamic State, actually strengthening some of those other forces. This would be a policy disaster. I am therefore arguing strongly against that possibility. This is the point I wish to make in that regard. With regard to water and food resources, much of the territory controlled by the Islamic State is desert. But the Islamic State has plenty of money, and the Islamic State is able, therefore, to purchase foodstuffs also in Turkey and also to export and import what it needs. It also has granaries and storages of grain inside the area which it controls, and therefore it is able to produce basic foodstuffs necessary for the population. With regard to water, well, the Islamic State also stretches along the Euphrates River basin, as people will have noticed from the map. For a while, it also controlled the Mosul Dam, of course. If it conquers the Haditha Dam, close to Baghdad, it will control the issue of water supply into Baghdad itself, and then it will have a real and very powerful strategic instrument in its hands. And just lastly, with regard to the issue of why are people attracted by such ideologies as that of Islamic State, look, again, at the risk of, I don't know what, at the risk of nothing, sitting here in a nice, safe room, let me say the following. It's not that the ideology of Islamic State has a universal mass appeal. Very clearly it does not. Very clearly it has an appeal only to a very limited population, for the most part, of people emerging, immigrants, and also immigrants from and residents of the Muslim world. So to understand this ideology, one has to understand the fact that the Muslim world, but specifically the Arab world, is in the midst of a very deep developmental and existential crisis. The response of Arab states and Arab societies to modernity has been deeply problematic. The development of political institutions and the development of liberal society and liberal space in the Arab world has been almost uniquely unsuccessful on the globe today in the course of the last 4 or 5 decades. And the appeal of this kind of ideologies is that they offer a very wrong but very superficially attractive answer to that very deep existential crisis. So it's not that people in general are being attracted to this ideology, it is that people emerging from a particular part of the world and a particular tradition which has itself experienced enormous troubles in its encounter with modernity, and probably unique troubles in its encounter with modernity. It is individuals from that section of our global population who are being attracted by this ideology. This ideology, therefore, as I said at the beginning, or I reiterate, as I said before, is an ideology which is going to have to play itself out. It's going to have its turn, and it's going to fail, whether we like it or not, actually, and whether its adherents like it or not. It's going to have its turn, and it is going to fail. So just to conclude, I would very much hope that the Islamic State, and indeed its most prominent opponents, such as the Hezbollah organization and Jabhat al-Nusra, will vanish from the face of the earth as soon as possible. If we wish that, and if we wish also to not pay an unnecessary price ourselves in the process of making that happen, we would be well advised to understand the nature of these phenomena in order to develop our responses to them.
Charles Ross, European Anti-Corruption Center. I'd like to ask our distinguished panelists to address a new subject we have not yet touched. In a world where we see a rapidly declining price of oil and symbolized by a new market dynamic of Chinese traders parking supertankers at the southern tip of Africa and in 2 other major locations, we see the Islamic State effectively largely supported by its exports of oil. Certainly the prize, or the prizes in the region, above and beyond control of land, certainly include the oil fields, and in this light, General Kovanda and our other distinguished guests have explained the issues at stake. I'd like to ask our panel to explore the longer-term geostrategic economic issue of how do we handicap the Islamic State and the players so that they may settle their ancient scores, which in fact result from perhaps naive mistakes of borders being written in the 19th and early mid-20th century. Thank you.
I would like to ask if there is some other question that I would collect before we get the answers of or the opinions of the speakers, since we are approaching. So please, Ahmed Ismail in the back, and then one more time.
Dobrý večer, jmenuji se Ismail, já jsem z syrského Kurdistánu. Spíš otázka je pro zástupce Izraele. Váš národ taky dostal do problému, vy jste měli krutý problémy. Kurdové od začátku od živa byli protlačeni, než nedávna s ISILou byli, také jim stalo, co se vašemu národu stalo. Jestli pak jste podali ruku pomoc Kurdům a jste ochotní jim podat materiální pomoc? Děkuju.
Já bych ještě si dovolil doplnit tu svoji otázku. Chci upozornit na to, že Turecko je součástí NATO a pokud bude Turecko napadeno, ať už islámem, nebo kurdskými povstalci, nebo kýmkoliv jiným, tak celé NATO vstupuje do války. To je jenom na doplnění. Děkuju.
Well, since I'm not representing Czech Republic anymore, I can say that the Turks, as our NATO ally, have played very dirty games with some groups in the Middle East, and we should also remember that, and we should sometimes remind Turks what they have been doing, and we should be aware of the ideology of Mr. Erdogan, whose ideology is the Muslim Brotherhood. And he's not hiding that, and he's hiding that less than 10 years ago. And in his presidency, we will see more of that in the future. So let's see that as a NATO country, at least the mild, if that exists, Muslim brother is head of the state and head of the NATO member state. That was my comments, but please, gentlemen, let's respond to the last questions, and let's wrap it up since we are approaching the end of our 2-hour session, and we can then talk in the corridors in the future. So, Ellie or Jonathan? Jonathan.
I'm going to give Ellie the privilege of responding finally and wrapping things up. With regard to both questions, briefly, with regard to the issue of Islamic State's use of oil sales, Islamic State, of course, is selling oil in a contraband way, far cheaper, at rates far cheaper than those set on global markets. It is able to do that because it is able to bring the oil primarily into Turkey, and to some degree also, from what I understand, I've been told this also to some degree through KRG in northern Iraq as well. So solving the problem is not difficult, at least to theorize about. It can be solved by political pressure on those countries and entities which are permitting Islamic State to transport the oil into through their territories, and most importantly Turkey. Turkey is the most important player in this regard, and this relates in a sense to the second question about Turkey's role. One of the ways in which Turkey, I think, is playing a not constructive role, if I can put it that way, is by effectively turning a blind eye to the transport of this oil from Syria, controlled by Islamic State, and into Turkey. with regard to the second question, second related question of the Kurds and who has helped the Kurds and so on, I mean, if we're being asked as Israelis, have we helped the Kurds and so on, I mean, as a country, the answer is an interesting one. Israel actually has a very deep and long-standing relationship with the Kurdish regional government of Barzani in northern Iraq. And this is a relationship which is largely invisible to the naked eye, if one can put it that way, but it includes also quite deep economic connections, and from what I'm told at least, also some connections in the realm of security, for example, the airport in Erbil and so on and so forth. So I think that there is a relationship there, and Israel is offering some assistance. With regard to the Syrian Kurdish entity controlled by PYD, which is a franchise of the PKK, the situation is different. Israel, at least as far as I understand it, and probably I understand it as well as some other people, there is no particular relationship. Can I just say, with regard to myself, if the question is, have we done anything to help the Kurds, that I think I'm able to say that myself as a journalist, I've spent more time in the Kurdish regions of Syria probably than any other single foreign journalist. I was one of the very first foreign journalists to write about the YPG militia in the global media in English, and specifically to make the point that this was a well-trained, trustworthy, and generally pro-Western military organization in an area in which those kind of organizations are not thick on the ground, and that therefore we as Westerners and we as Westerners and citizens of democracies should be thinking very carefully about offering what support we can to the Kurdish enclaves in Syria. So this is my own personal record for what it's worth, which I simply add out of interest.
First of all, about oil, I think the Iraqi oil is important, not so important like in the past. We see the oil market, the fact that the United States is using the shale oil becoming a very important moderating power in the prices of oil. Israel, Cyprus, and Greece all of a sudden already are rich, especially Israel, in gas. We have Brazil, which has enormous quantities of shale oil in the sea. So I think that oil will little by little, the Middle Eastern oil will little by little be less important. Israel already has probably some agreement with Jordan and Egypt. We bought gas from Egypt. Now we are selling, at least trying to sell to Egypt gas. So you see how the things changed. About the Kurds, Israel has supported the Kurdish insurgencies in the 70s with cooperation with the Shah regime. The moment the Shah decided to make an agreement with Saddam Hussein, our advisors were expelled from Kurdistan and from Iran at that time, and then clearly the Iranian revolution changed everything. But the Kurdish people does not forget this. And when PKK, the Turkish PKK, accused Israel of supporting Turkey in the 80s and 90s in the fight against PKK, never they attacked Israeli or threatened Israeli targets, even when 4 Kurds were killed inside the Israeli embassy in Berlin during a manifestation after the arrest of their leader, Öcalan. So I think that we are supporting, by the way, our Prime Minister already declared we are supporting the independence of the Kurds. The Kurds were not happy because this is, for us at this moment, counterproductive. Okay, we don't want to be in conflict with the central government in Baghdad, with the Iranians, with the Americans. The Americans don't want a free Kurdistan. So it's a sensitive issue, and I think Israel will do everything possible because naturally, they are allies of Israel. They were allies and will be allies in the future. Turkey, I have a lot to say, but I think other occasion will speak about Turkey.
So, it's 7 p.m. Before thanking everyone for thanking to you that you have come and participated in this discussion, and our guests who have arrived from the other side of Czech Republic and from Israel, I think that we will continue with these topics and the other topics in the future, because this Middle Eastern turmoil has been in its third year, and it's just the beginning. And I think it's just the beginning in this part of Middle East which we have discussed today, and it's unfortunately just the beginning in other parts, because we could discuss the situation in Libya, we could discuss the situation in Egypt, and in many, many other places. The list is really long. Definitely the world order of the Middle East, as was drawn by Sykes-Picot 100 years ago, is by this moment ceasing to exist. If it's going to be the Balkanization of the Middle East, or if we are going to be calling that in different names, we will see. But this is a long process which we can hardly influence from outside, and it's hard to say who can influence it from inside. The final result and the end game is definitely not known yet. There were many people in Europe who wished that the unipolar world of the United States ceased to exist, so it has ceased to exist. I'm not saying that it could have been kept forever, or it has been possible to prolong it, but definitely that wish is fulfilled, and the US, the world is not that much dominated by the United States anymore. The vacuum which is being left, willingly or unwillingly, but by the way, by policies of President Obama of creating that vacuum and stating that it is a policy of the United States, then is being filled by others. It's being filled by others in the Middle East, it's being filled by others in other parts of the world, and definitely we will see those processes continuing, and we will see what's going to be US response and the European response in the future. But we will see more of the asymmetric warfare and more of the confusion on the battlefields, less straight battlefield lines as we did see in the past, and we will see the reconfiguration of the ideas of sovereign state, because you cannot point to the Middle East and to many other places of the world where you would say this is the sovereign state order as we knew 20 years ago or half a century ago. So we are entering the new period, which is going to be interesting, and we will definitely engage in those debates on the podium on the floor of CEVRO. I really thank Eli and Jonathan for coming. I really thank the ICT, the Counter-Terrorism Institute in Israel, where we have established long-term cooperation, and we will continue in the future. And I wish to see all of you here for other relevant events dealing with security, foreign affairs, or any other issues at the CEVRO Institute. Thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening. This is a shameful mistake. I also, of course, thank General Kovanda for coming in, and I do thank him for everything what he has done and other troops in Afghanistan on behalf of Czech Republic and the free world.